Welcome back to Cape Town, where we continue our live broadcast of reactions to yesterday's decision to postpone the State of the Nation address. Remember, that announcement was made by the presiding officers of Parliament, Speaker Baleka Mbete and Uthandi Modise. Joining us now to unpack a little bit more and to discuss that is the Chief Whip of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen. Mr. Steenhuisen, good morning and thanks so very much for joining us.
Great. It's great to be with you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You guys yesterday were saying that you were delighted by the decision. You've had a little bit of sleep over it. You still think it was the right decision?
Certainly. I think it was absolutely the right decision in terms of the institutional integrity of Parliament. It would have been a complete farce for Mr. Zuma to appear in the National Assembly and deliver a Sona, which we all know would be amount to fairy tales that would never be implemented. So I think that was the right decision by Parliament. It's what happens now that I think needs to be very carefully looked at and watched to ensure that we fulfill all the constitutional prescripts for what happens. I think the big question on everyone's lips is now not if Mr. Zuma is going, it's when Mr. Zuma is going, and what the circumstances of that departure will be. What kind of deals are being cut behind closed doors in the smoky rooms of the ANC, Luthuli House and in other venues, and what is on the table for Mr. Zuma to hasten that departure. And I think that's what South Africans need to be levelled with and to know what's going on.
What will you specifically as the Democratic Alliance be looking out for in those discussions, in those deals? Where are the issues that you'll be looking at?
Well, I think it would be incredibly problematic if Mr. Zuma was to be offered some form of immunity from prosecution to go in peace and sin no more. I think that one of the constitutional founding principles is equality before the law. The courts have decided after 10 years of legal battles that Mr. Zuma has a case to answer on those 783 counts of fraud, corruption and racketeering. Nobody, whether it's the Deputy President, can offer that immunity. There's no provision for it in law. Mr. Zuma must face those charges. And if that is what's on the table, we certainly would not be standing by and allowing that to happen. We will be in court again, overturning that as an irrational decision.
All right. Now let's talk a little bit about your expectations as the Democratic Alliance. You had called for this postponement. When would you like Sona to actually be delivered?
Well, it all depends on when Mr. Zuma goes. We would hope that it would certainly be quickly, because I think what we need to do is show the world certainty, and particularly the markets, who are very jittery when you have these interregnum periods where no one really knows what's happening. So I think that Mr. Zuma must go, but then the National Assembly must convene to elect the president. I think it would be very difficult for Mr. Ramaphosa to deliver a Sona as an acting president. I think it would have the similar problems as you would have had if Mr. Zuma had been delivering it. So only the National Assembly can confer the legitimacy of the presidency on a candidate, because as the Constitution prescribes, it's the National Assembly that elects a president. So I would hope that we convene early next week. Prior to any Sona taking place, we elect a president through the processes prescribed, and then we move on from there.
All right. So Sona next week, maybe next week Thursday still?
I think so. I think we could do it next week Thursday, but again, it depends on whether Mr. Zuma digs in and how successful Mr. Ramaphosa is in moving him. As we know from past events, these events can move very quickly. They can move very slowly. We would hope certainly for the country's sake and for our markets and economy's sake that it moves quickly and that we confer the legitimacy by the National Assembly as soon as possible, rather than having a long period where we have an acting president who doesn't carry that legitimacy.
All right. So this morning we've already seen both the president and the deputy president arrive. We've seen a few ministers walking right past us, obviously to go and meet and caucus with the president. What do you think is the mood like within the ANC at the moment, and what would be the issues, other of course than his Zuma's departure, that take priority?
Well, of course, I mean, this is a political environment, and I think there's two camps. There's those who are delighted that they're finally seeing the back of Mr. Zuma. I think they're in the Ramaphosa camp, but I think there's the Zuma camp and the Zupta camp that still exists here in Parliament in a very big number, who are obviously worried now about their positions and where they fit in this new administration that could be coming. And obviously ministers worrying about their future tenure in a cabinet and what the future holds for them, because it's very clear that Mr. Ramaphosa, if he gets elected, is going to make sure that his faction is well represented in the cabinet and Mr. Zuma's core supporters are turfed out.
All right. John Steenhuisen, thank you very much. That was the Chief Whip of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, basically talking to us about their expectations as to what they would like to see going forward in terms of the Parliament, or the House at least, reconvening, possibly to even elect a new president. But all of that, of course, is dependent on when President Jacob Zuma does resign, if he does do so. For the time being, from us in Parliament, we now cross here. Let's take a quick break, and then after that we go back to studio in Johannesburg.